So this year is very special to me because on May 21st, 2026, I turned 49 years of age. And this year is very special to me because anyone who knows me knows that I had been, what's the word that I want to use? I had been, on one hand, looking forward to turning 49 and eventually 50. But it's also a somber number for me because I lost my mother when she was 49 years old, 20 years ago, from breast cancer. And because of that, there were, if you ever talk to people who had lost parents at a fairly young age, um, that birthday for you comes around because it's very difficult for you to be able to imagine your life beyond that age. And then you get there and you're like, oh, okay, I made it. I made it. And I'm healthy and I'm happy and I'm doing more than just okay. Like my life is thriving in many ways. And that's definitely because I made some really different choices in my life than my mom had the opportunity to make in her own life. And so I just wanted to be able to talk about that a little bit, um, about what it feels like and what it looks like to be able to create my life from a vision of vibrancy, from a vision of expansiveness, and really just being able to be a more sovereign being, a more, just someone who's doing her own thing. And so, excuse me, living a slow, enriched life it's not an indulgence. One of the things that I remember my mom always saying to me growing up from time to time was that I had always thought she would call me the Queen of Sheba. And this was, I can laugh about it now, but back then it kind of hurt, even in hearing it. Um, she said, oh, she thinks that she's the Queen of Sheba. And because she thought that I thought that I was deserving of something that perhaps I had not necessarily worked for. Um, and I'm not against work. Let me be clear. I'm not against work. But I am for people being able to choose what that work looks and feels like. You get to choose what that looks like. If you want to work yourself half to death, have at it. You can do that. But there's also ways for you to be able to have a really beautiful life that moves a little bit slower, that, sort of picks up on your skills and your talents, the things that you love to do, the things that you want to be able to share with the world. And of course, now with the internet and even with the use of AI, as much as we complain about it, there's a lot of good uses of all of these technological advantages advances that allow me to be able to live the life that I do. So if you're new here, my name is Helana Black. I left the US in 2018, and um, I have lived in 10 countries since then. I am a working writer. I get paid to write. And for the most part, I've been working as a writer in the B2B, business to business industry, working for a lot of tech companies, as well as writing for magazines and teaching writing classes, and all sorts of other things that I am working on creating things like that. But I left the US in 2018, lived in 10 countries. Right now, I live in Mexico, in Playa del Carmen to be exact. And I love my life. I love the life that I get to live. This is when people say that they have to pinch themselves sometimes because they don't believe that they get to have they get to have what they've always wanted and more. Like my life is always expanding. Um, I really do mean that. I really do mean that I have the life that I've wanted. And it's because I've made some very specific choices in my life to move in a certain way, to think in a certain way. Um, and I just wanted to share some of that with you today. And so, what did my life look like before I left the US in 2018? Well, I had a 12-year career in the field of education, international education to be exact. That's what I went to school for. Um, I was also a Peace Corps volunteer. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in my early 20s, right after I got out of college. Spent 2 years in the country of Togo um, in a very small um, village in central Togo. Um, and I learned what it was like to live in a small agrarian society. Um, I worked with um, women who were farmers, and so they created shea butter, which was an awesome opportunity. At the time, I don't remember that shea butter was as big as it is now. Um, so shea butter and seeing how like shea butter was made and being able to participate in the process. You know, shea butter actually comes from a tree, comes from a nut, and it has a very long process that for most of the women who make it, it's a process that is done by hand. From what I understand, that even today, there isn't really a more mechanical way to be able to do it and still be able to get a good quality of shea butter. So to be able to experience that process of doing things in a slow way, to be able to watch people, um, who are experts at their craft, to be able to be with people who live their lives by an agricultural calendar, where they are really depending on seasons and, they don't necessarily live their lives by their watch. What they do is they live by seasons. Remember people would ask me, my name in my village was Sahada. So I would say, Sahada, um, how long have you been here? Have you been here a year yet? And I would say, oh, I've, sort of, I've been here X number of months. And they would say, oh, yeah, because you came here during the harvest season. I remember that part. Um, so it was nice to be able to see, to be able to live in that sort of a different place, where in my normal life, where I was used to going to school and I graduated from school and had worked and have worked, for a number of years, even while I was in school. Um, you live your life by your watch, by your calendar. Uh, Everything is scheduled by the day, the week, the minute. You know what you're going to be doing, weeks and months ahead of time. Um, which is good in a lot of ways. I'm still a business person even now in my life that I live traveling and moving around. Um, but I've just gotten rid of the high stress, the overfunctioning that drains my nervous system, And so, yeah, I did the Peace Corps, and then, I did that for 2 years, came back home, built a home in Washington, D.C., and for a good 12 years, um, I worked in the field of education. I worked in community colleges. I worked in four-year colleges. I've done some work overseas in West Africa, in, let's see, Burkina Faso, in Mali, and Ghana, working with educational systems there. And then eventually I went on to get a master's degree in international education from the University of Massachusetts. And so, high stress, over functioning, all of those, while they were pieces, they were parts of those systems that I did enjoy. I did enjoy, teaching students. I had worked in adult ed for a good number of years, where I was teaching people how to read, and to be able to not just teach them how to read, but also to be able to get jobs, but also to be able to appreciate what it is that they're reading, and being able to take full ownership of their lives and what it is that they want to be able to do with themselves. Um, and so that was really an exciting work for me to be able to do. But there was a point where I know for sure that I realized that I wanted to be able to teach people how to be free, but I had never learned how to be free within myself. After watching my mom pass away from cancer, and watching other people around me, who stayed sick, stayed, you know, a lot of people were overweight. I myself was overweight. I was, teetering on going over 300 pounds. Um, and I was just not healthy. I wasn't happy. I had joined a doctorate program, um, did a lot of the coursework, and eventually wound up flunking out because of the stress of, my life. I was married at the time, um, and I just couldn't handle the stress of having that relationship and trying to go to school and being able to focus and figure out what I was doing. And of course, it was devastating at the time when I graduate when I was had to leave the school. Um, but in hindsight, I don't even I don't even think about it anymore. It was a good thing for me to be, to have left that particular program that I was in, because it just didn't fit the life that I wanted to have. Being an academic was not in the cards for me. Um, and so, I just didn't, I didn't then, and I don't see the point in me trying to go back to even complete it. Some people have asked me, you should go back and, reapply. You've done other things. And, I have no interest in being an academic. I like being out in the world, and teaching this way. I like being able to talk to people, teach people, and to be able to live differently. The way that I've learned that the way that I think and the way that I move in the world, it doesn't really match with what a lot of people in academia do. And so it would always be frustrating. It would always be frustrating for me to be able to do that. And so I like to be able to talk to people who like to be able to do sort of their own thing, figuring out what that own thing looks like and being able to create it. And so, as I said, in 2018, I left the United States. I didn't have a lot of money. I left literally with about $2,000 in my bank account. I had some B2B writing skills, B2B meaning business to business. And so I wrote like blog posts and ebooks, white papers, and things like that. And so at the time, I was making roughly about $1,500 to $2,000 a month. That's important to note, because some people, they're like, oh, I could just, I got $1,000, I can just leave, but they don't have any way to be able to create. They don't have any way to be able to create income. So you got to find a way to be able to create income. um, while you're overseas. Or, if you have a nest egg and you have a certain amount of money, to be able to move overseas, and you want to be able to use that money over a certain number of weeks or months, you can also do that as well. Um, and so I did, what do they call it? Is it geo-arbitrage, global arbitrage? Um, yeah, geo-arbitrage is what it's called. Geo-arbitrage is a financial and lifestyle strategy where you earn money in a high-income region or a strong currency while living and spending in a lower-cost area. By decoupling your income from your expenses, you maximize your purchasing power and accelerate your savings. So that was what I did. I left the U.S. in July of 2018. So this is actually my 8th year of travel. Um, I went to Dubai for some days, just to be able to hang out. It was on a layover, and then I went to Thailand, um, and I expected to be there maybe about 3 months. Expected to be there about 3 months, and it turned out that like it's just like I've been gone for 8 years. I expected to go to Thailand for 3 months, have a nice experience, and maybe come back and decide what else that I could do. But once I got to Thailand and saw that other people, like, this was their permanent lifestyle, and I was just like, wow. And this is what I had always had in my head, and I had always known since I was a Peace Corps volunteer that there were other ways of being able to live, that to be, that it's not so weird to be an American and live in another country, to be able to live the life that I had always wanted to live, and to be able to live slower, and to be able to still make US dollars, um, and to be able to have a really great lifestyle overseas. Um, it was just a matter of figuring out how to do that. And so I had my B2B clients. I probably worked with 2 to 3 people at a time. I also had clients because as a writer, I do several things. So it was not just B2B writing. I also had clients where I was doing food writing. And so I would do uh, write mini cookbooks for people. I had a couple of clients who were health influencers. One worked with women on various health issues, and then I had another who she worked for children, and not she worked with children. She worked with mothers who had small kids, and so she would teach them how to be able to cook healthy meals for them. And so I worked with both of them to be able to create these little mini cookbooks on and so I learned how to become a recipe developer. My point in sharing this with you is that I I've always been a creative person. And so, and being a creative person who, made my money in different places, I just want you to know that it's possible for you to be able to say, I have interests in different places. If you're a multi-passionate person, if you have multiple interests in different places, now notice all of them, they were all, writing, but they were writing different things. And so I was able to write and build skills in different areas. B2B writing, I'll be honest with you, was never really my passion, but I knew that the clients paid well, and I was learning skills that I actually use in all of the writing services that I use. or that I offer to other people. So it's not like it was a waste of time. Um, and so when I moved to Thailand, moved to Bangkok, was there for maybe 3 or 4 days. I actually stayed in a hostel. I was, how old was I? About 41 years old at the time. Um, and at the hostel, I stayed in a single room. I'm much too old to be trying to do a shared room in a hospital. In a hostel. That's not necessarily my thing. However, I did have to share a bathroom, and so in the bath, they had several bathrooms on each floor. And the hostel happened to be a bit bare at the time. There was maybe one or two other people that were staying there, and everything was always super clean. That's, I can't do, you know, I can't do a place that's not up to par. Um, and it really wasn't that expensive. The few days that I spent there, if I'd spent $100, that would have been a lot of money. I don't even think I spent $100. And then to eat, because I didn't have a kitchen, I had to go out to eat. What I learned in Thailand is that eating out is normal. A lot of, regular Thai people, they don't necessarily keep kitchens at home because it's so cheap to be able to eat outside. And it's very easy for you to be able to get, fresh fruit. Everything, the food on the street is made fresh. Now, the quality of the cooking varied. Quality of the cooking meaning, um, how healthy did they prepare the food? That changed from place to place, but it was always very easy to be able to find healthy food. Like if you're a vegan, you can find vegan food. If you are a meat eater but you still want to be able to eat, um, you know, still healthfully, you can still do that in Thailand. And that's one of the things that I really love about Thailand, just being able to have, fresh food all over the place. And really in all of the countries that I've been to, because I've lived in 10 countries, in all the countries that I've been to, fresh food is more fresh food is just a given. Like why would the food not be fresh? It's only in a place like America where people are trying to throw on you our need to be able to do things faster, to be more efficient. It's really quite ridiculous. And we do it to the detriment of our own health and well-being. And so living in another country allows me to be able to um, live in a way that's very easy. It's not overly expensive. As a matter of fact, getting the getting the natural food is the least expensive option. They have fast food in Thailand and all of the countries that I've been to. You can go to a Popeyes, a KFC, McDonald's, or Burger King. Um, those were the more expensive options. Whereas in the United States, it tends to be opposite. If you want the natural food, the high quality natural food, that tends to be the more expensive option, where the fast food is the cheaper option, which is why it's so easy for many of us to gain weight so quickly and people not understanding why. And so where did I live while I was in Thailand? Um, my first, or I lived in several places. So I was in Bangkok. I lived in the hostel, stayed there for a few days, realized that, it was very clear that Bangkok is a huge city, huge international city, and it was doing a little too much for me. I had a lot of health issues at the time, and I decided that I needed someplace a little calmer. So I moved to the north of Thailand to a city called Chiang Mai. Um, and I loved Chiang Mai because it's a smaller town, smaller city, but they're still like forests. It's kind of challenging to explain. But I lived in this sort of forest community. It was a group of young people, young Thai people who just went in there and they just decided to start building stuff. And it's in the middle of this beautiful, beautiful forest. I mean, just trees. I want to say teak trees, but I'm not sure if they were teak. But they were huge. These huge trees. Um, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go into a forest or a place where that's highly wooded, and there's not a lot of development in the area. But you just walk into the place and it's like your nervous system immediately calms down. Um, just it's like a sense of relief when you walk into the place. Um, and so I lived in again, it was a small room. It didn't have a kitchen. It was, just it had a large bed, a table, a little couch area. It had a TV. It had this cute little mural on the wall. I love Asia for like murals, and they like to be able to make things what I call Instagrammable. You can just take a cute picture, and it was always cute. I have to go back and find those pictures from that time. And I had a very small um, patio, a porch space where I can look out and I can just look out onto the trees and the homes. Um, and it was just so beautiful. And what the young people were doing in that particular area, there were a lot of traditional things like, traditional Thai homes, which usually tend to be made of wood. Um, and then there were Buddhist temples in there that I found. Um, they had schools for children. Um, and then there were a lot of young people who were building their own small businesses. So there were bakeries, there was a tiny bookstore, vegan restaurants, gluten-free restaurants, little tiny clothing stores. No, not any, big store shops like a Walmart or anything like that, but just small, independent places that maybe had one or two people in there working, and you can sit. And then there were some larger, larger places. Like there were a couple of places. I'll tell you about two of my favorite places. There was a restaurant. Their food wasn't necessarily the best, but I just loved. It was like a glass house, literally. Ceiling all the way to the floor was like a glass house, and it was beautifully decorated, and all of these beautiful almost fluorescent colors with fresh flowers all over the place. And of course, they had, if you've ever seen like bougainvillea flowers, just, trailing the walls, and, every table had fresh flowers on it, these big bouquets of flowers that were locally grown. Um, and I would go in there and I would bring my computer. And of course, even in the forest, all the places had internet that worked perfectly. Um, and you can go and you can do your work for a few hours. Once an hour you buy yourself a little smoothie, or get yourself a little meal when you are hungry. And it was such a nice place to work. And the second place that I really loved was a cafe. And it had several parts of the cafe. It had like a walkway that was made of wood, and it had like prayer flags going to the entrance. And so it just felt very, I don't know, very spiritual, very formal. And then part of the cafe was actually in this large tree. And so you would have to go up the steps and you could sit down. And it was a tree house, but it was, and it was open and it was airy. Um, gorgeous. And then they had another part, that's the part that I would always go to, that had air conditioning. Again, another glass house, with all the comfy furniture, and they would come in and they had like the banana chocolate cream cakes, and you can get good coffee and tea, and it was just such. I mean, it was such an experience to be able to be there. Now, if you compare that to the experience of working in America, where for the most part I had always worked in, a freaking cubicle. I remember one of my last jobs I had in the States, they didn't even give me a cubicle. It was just like a table on the outside of the cubicle. There were no windows, there was no ventilation. People were super strict with, I had a 30-minute lunch break. Um, and you just had to grab something really quick, or microwave something from home. That just the way you work to me matters. You do. I don't. I want to work in a place that's beautiful. I want to be able to have access to good food that's easy. That I'm not looking for a gourmet meal every day, although that is nice too. The gourmet meal is nice too. Um, but I like to be able to have, good, fresh, healthy food available to me, to have snacks. You know, it- in the States, if you work at a larger company where, they would put, the donuts in the kitchen, or they would have the vending machines with the cinnamon buns, cinnamon rolls in it, and the sodas. It's like, there's nothing life affirming about any of these workplaces. It's like you come in, you produce for, whatever amount of hours that you're there, and then you leave and you collect your check at the end of the week. Nothing life affirming about that process. And what I was learning in Thailand was that it was possible to go to all these beautiful places. I could, I found that, you know, I was a lot more creative in my thinking because of the way that I was able to choose to work. Um, I get to choose the types of clients that I wanted to work with, as opposed to just showing up and saying, all right, Halana, well, this is your project, you're working on it, whether I liked it or not. There's no hierarchy as to who's working on what and where and when. As an independent writer, I am able to decide who it is that I'm working with. I get to make those sorts of decisions, which, that if you're not a person who is, if you're not an independent thinker, if you need for other people to tell you what to do, otherwise you don't do it, then this is not a lifestyle for you. But if you are a person who can get up and decide how you want to work, where you want to work, who you're working with, then this is a great place. Thailand, or really, there's a lot of other countries in the world that might, or you can stay in the States. And I know some people who stay in the States and they choose to travel during certain times of the year because they have other obligations. Maybe they're taking care of family, they have children, they have a spouse who's doing other things, and they have to travel during specific times of the year when it's convenient for everybody. Um, but being able to do your own thing and be able to create what your work life looks like, I'll take that any day over a setup. Corporate setup. I can't, I don't even know how to do that anymore. I don't even know how to do that anymore. Like, and that's just, I don't, I just, I'm like, I'm so lucky. I'm so blessed, and I love the life that I have. I love it so much. Um, and so, oh, I also want to tell you about the other place that I lived in while I was in Thailand. I lived in that particular, I call it the magical forest. Lived there for some months, and then I moved to a luxury, a more of a luxury apartment building, which was right across from a large mall. And the reason I love this large mall is because they had a grocery store, it had a small bookstore, it had so the bottom floors I've noticed of a lot of Thai malls tends to be like a food court. Oh, fabulous food. I mean, just fabulous, fabulous, fabulous foods of all kinds. You can just go in there morning, noon, and night and get the type of any type of food that you want to be able to get. Um, but it also had this really great movie theaters, and I learned that Asian movie theaters, like you know how in the States you get the the movies where they give you the special glasses, or it might have a certain type of sound system. That's freaking normal in Asia. Like that's normal. They'll give you perks, like some of them will have like these big seats. They'll give you a blanket. They'll give you like, food. They'll serve you food while you're in there. Like that's normal for Asia. And everybody likes to think that these countries are, so small and you know, poverty stricken. They're actually not. Like the lifestyle that you get in Thailand and a lot of other places is so much better than what you get in America. And so the mall it had a very popular co-working space that stayed packed. Place stayed packed, and it was open 24 hours because a lot of people, um, if you were doing something like teaching or if you were working, um, living on the opposite end of the world, and you were working in U.S. hours, that meant that you would be up during the late hours of the night. And so a lot of co-working spaces were actually open overnight. They had a 24-hour schedule. And at the same time, you can go in and you can order food. You can order coffee. You can order, tea. You can get smoothies. I like the lifestyle is just different. The lifestyle is really just different. And so you can live how you need to be able to live and still be able to hold on to your tenets of wanting to be healthy, of wanting to be able to do well. I was never really into having to work overnight, and so the contracts that I work, I work my own schedule. They have a day and time in which they need me to be able to meet requirements for a project, and I just made sure I had it done. And as a matter of fact, it was actually nice because Thailand is sort of like a day ahead of the US. Um, it was almost like you were almost a day early, almost. The time is all the same, but it kind of it almost felt like you got an extra day um, to be able to do things. So a lot of things I would hand in early, and they'd be like, "Oh, she's so efficient." They had no idea I was in Thailand. Um, unless they asked me where I was located, then I would tell them the truth. Um, and so while I was in Thailand and I was, working and having all of these really great experiences, I figured out that I had time and space. I had time and space to be able to work on healing because it just became like it became really loud. You know how you ignore things, and the longer that you ignore things, the louder it tends to get. But what I noticed was that in the United States, things will get louder, but the other priorities that you have made for your life tend to be louder. And so, until you're ready to almost drop dead and have to be in hospital, your body gets ignored. What I experienced when I was in Thailand was that because I was paying attention to myself more, I was relaxing a little bit more. I had developed space to be able to take care of myself, and so um, I'll have to do another video on this on a separate day. But I went through a process that was only supposed to be 3 months, but it actually turned into 6 months, where I worked with a group of healers to be able to support me in helping me to heal my body through, fibroids. I had horrible anxiety, horrid anxiety. Just, I mean, couldn't sleep, couldn't relax, um, many things. Um, I could run a list of all the things that were um, wrong with me, or things that were breaking down. Not that my body was wrong, but they were just giving me signals, constantly giving me signals that I had ignored over a number of years, and everything just started to compound. I talked about how I was a little over 300 pounds, which is way too much. I'm 5'9". That's way too much weight on a body that's 5'9". Um, and so it was being in Chiang Mai. I didn't realize when I went there just how nice it was to be able to have a space where natural healing is pretty much everywhere. Pretty much everywhere. It was so I had I call them my natural healing team that I work with. Um, Plus the access to all the great food that I had, all work together to be able to help me to lose during that 6 months, roughly 60 to 70 pounds. I released fibroids, things shrank down, and it really just sort of gave me the beginning of a life that I wanted to be able to create. And so over the next few years, I had time and space to say, all right, well, now that those health things don't bother me anymore, I had all this space to be able to become the person that I had always wanted to be. And it took me a couple of years to be able to figure that out. What the hell, what the hell am I doing with myself? Why am I here on this planet? Why, who is it that I am here to serve? Um, and so I didn't know that this is what I was doing then, but now I understand that I wanted to work on three identities. Um, so this is sort of my personal development system. I developed three identities that I wanted to develop. One was to become an astute businesswoman. I wanted to become a better businesswoman. In my head, I'm $1 million creative. I'm not at that level yet, but she's on her way. She's in process. As a matter of fact, at this moment where I am living in Mexico, I am creating um, my creative home, my creative respite home. Um, and I'll talk about that at another time. But I am $1 million creative. That is the identity that I am developing. I'm also an athlete. During the years of my travel, and I was learning how to be able to, I was learning how to be able to be more fit. Because I lost the weight, but I didn't necessarily lose the weight because I was, doing a bunch of exercise. I had just released a lot of the mindsets that sort of relieved me to be able to release weight. I have to explain what that actually looks like the energetics of well-being works up to a certain point, and then you have to do things to be able to keep yourself healthy. And I had given myself time and space to discover that I actually like walking and even running. Never liked either one of those things before, and sure as hell didn't call myself an athlete. Um, but I call myself that now. I have the identity of an athlete. And so it helps me because I realize that as a traveler, when you have to pick up luggage and all sorts of bags and you have to run in through the airports and um, you have to be at a certain level of fitness in order to do this. Otherwise, it's going to be hell. To stuff yourself into a seat for 15 hours on an airplane is absolute hell. And I just say I'm not doing that anymore. I do not want to be that person. To be able to have to get up and use the restroom and you can barely close the door behind you. Even if you're a tiny person, you still have to, you know, you can barely get in the door and close the door behind you. But it's really rough when you're living in a larger body. And so I said, I don't want to do that. I want to be a person who's strong. Go to a lot of countries, they don't have elevators in certain places. I lived in Vietnam for a while, and I remember going to what's the city in northern Vietnam. Why is it not coming up? Northern Vietnam, Hanoi. That's the name of it. I don't know why that slipped my mind. But going to Hanoi, I went, stayed in a place, and of course, I wanted a place with a really great view because that's always important to me. I had to travel up 5 flights of steps with 2 bags. Do you know how much that sucks? And by the time I got into Vietnam, I lost a bunch of weight. But hell, if I was still 300 pounds, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Wouldn't have been able to do that. And so I take on the identity of an athlete. She's also in development. And when I lived in Rwanda for 3 years. I had access to being in a space where that part of the continent of Africa is where a lot of the best runners come from. And so I got the opportunity to run in a few races. Again, I didn't even put that on my vision board. Did not even put that on my vision board. But I said in my mind that I wanted to take on the identity of an athlete. So when you take on the identity of things, you get opportunities that show up that you maybe didn't even plan for. Didn't even plan for that. And so it's not that I'm trying to be the super big professional runner, but I at least want to be able to be in the space. And so I ran a few 5Ks, a few 10Ks, and then when I moved on and I moved to Mexico, I did my first half marathon. My God, today, Alana Black did a half marathon. Now, it took me some time to be able to finish it. My time wasn't all that great, but damn it, I did it. I did the half marathon, and I would love to be able to do another one in 2027. Right now, I'm working on um, being able to run longer distances at a slower pace. to be able to run longer distances at a slower pace. So being able to run a couple miles at a time without stopping. Um, I'm sort of going back to basics, where I can run longer distances, and I'm finding that I'm having like the 49 is a weird age with perimenopause and all this other stuff, and so I've had to rework my sleep and all sorts of other stuff. But still, in my head, I am an athlete, and I've been studying some other women who are athletes, who are runners in midlife, and I'm learning a lot from them and learning how to be able to do this at this stage of my life. So I'm working on building more muscle. I want to be more muscular. It's not enough to just say I want to be thin, but you got to be muscular. You got to be able to build, because the muscle does start, like whatever muscle you did have. I'm learning as I move towards 50 and beyond, that muscle will just it goes away. It's like if you're not like if you are not actively working on building the muscle will fall. And so, I've been doing my squats. I've been working with my exercise bands. Um, I've been doing my long distance walking. It's hot season here in Playa del Carmen, so I'm not necessarily running, but I'm walking long distances along with doing the muscle development. Um, so that's my athletic identity. And then my third identity is being a better Buddhist practitioner. While I was in Thailand, I sort of laid a foundation for myself to be able to study Buddhism and what it means. And it's sort of been a slow process for me to become a better spiritual practitioner, where I can learn Buddhism, but also learn the tenets of many other religions, other faiths. Um, so I learned, basic tenets of Islam, which, when I was in Peace Corps, I lived in a Muslim village. And so I have that sort of as a foundation of what it looks like to be a Muslim in day-to-day life. Um, and of course, Christianity. Um, I study parts of Hinduism and other things. And so I just want to be a more well-rounded spiritual person with Buddhism as my foundation. Um, and so yeah, so I did this whole video. Um, I hope that if you're still here, I hope that this video has been interesting to you. Because it was definitely interesting for me to be able to record for you. And I really just wanted to be able to share that whatever you wanted to do in this part of your life, you could do it. If you've always wanted to live a certain way that's in a contradiction to what it is that you currently have, start the plan. Start really thinking about what it is that you want. That's a really great place to be able to start. I have a Substack. I keep a Substack where I teach women in midlife how to use journaling to be able to get the life of your dreams. It's sort of like you're reclaiming your creative life. Yeah, you're reclaiming your creative life. Um, and so, if you're interested in that, you can go to halana.substack.com. You can find the link in the description box. Um, but I'm turning it into a weekly experience. Right now, I'm just sort of doing things monthly, but I want it to be a weekly experience where you You get a weekly essay and a really good journaling, juicy journaling prompt. I really hate these journaling prompts where they give you like 2 words and they're like, oh, write about the color orange. I give you really juicy prompts. If you really like what I shared here today in this video about how the decisions you have to make to change who you are from the inside out, to change your mindset about who you need to be able to become that, and to be able to just give yourself permission to be able to do something different. You can go to my Substack. Um, you there it has a price attached to it, but all of the information there is free. The price for right now is just for folks who just want to be able to support, and I appreciate it. But pretty soon it's going to be everything is going to have it's going to be for a specific paid subscriber group as I get more um, organized around how it is that I want to create this writing, this journaling and writing community that I am building. So come on and join me over at Substack if writing is your thing, if journaling is your jam. Um, Again, my name is Halana Black, and I appreciate you for being here with me. I will see you tomorrow.